Bob Seeley.
Thank you very much indeed. I fully support this motion and I call on the BBC to reconsider this incredibly poor decision to cut news output locally. Indeed, I wrote a letter to the BBC bigwigs about the plight of BBC Radio Solent, and I'm glad that 7 other colleagues from across the House signed that letter. Instead of cutting back local BBC coverage, we should actually be investing and expanding it. And I thank my right honourable friend for this incredibly timely debate, and it's a privilege to be part of it and to listen to some great speeches. I just want to make 3 points, and I'll do so relatively briefly to make sure we can all come in. Despite representing just 3% of the BBC's total spend, local radio reaches 5.7 million people every week. That is an extraordinarily high figure. And as my honourable friend from Great Grimsby pointed out, it shows significant reach. It also shows very significant value for money. BBC Radio Solent, for example, covers 1.9 million people across the Isle of Wight, Hampshire and Dorset, and like many other BBC local radio stations, broadcasts to a relatively large audience, as I said, at relatively low cost. I would also make the point it's already an amalgam. In a perfect world, we'd have our own BBC Isle of Wight because, you know, we don't share that much in common with Dorset. What on earth we're going to share news-wise with Oxfordshire, I simply don't know, because it's 100 miles away and on the mainland. So we cannot see a further regionalisation of so-called local services. Secondly, these cuts, if I understand correctly, will affect £19 million of spending against a licence fee of some £3.8 billion. And for me, this is entirely the wrong place to cut and to start a reorganisation of services, especially when it comes to 2 of the major costs that the BBC have. People are always complaining about its bloated management structures, and there seem to be people on really significant 6-figure salaries that you do wonder what their purpose at the BBC is, at a time when we are still paying junior reporters, radio reporters, junior BBC reporters in the region some £30,000 or just over £30,000 a year. And I just wonder if the BBC, I don't think the BBC's got its priorities right in any way, shape or form. And again, I don't want to talk about specific individuals, but when you have multi-millionaires being paid over £1 million a year, when you have significant and well-known and very rich people already earning between £400,000 and £1 million a year for our national broadcaster, when they're already famous, they're already rich. And yet, if they want to go and earn more money in Sky or ITV, that's absolutely fine. They are commercial and can make whatever market rate they want. But I just think it's confusing, and I don't think BBC audiences understand why some of these people are paid so much money when the heart and soul of the BBC, as far as I can see, and one of its biggest products, its local radio, people are really struggling to get by on very, very modest sums of money. I would also say that local journalists, and I know my local BBC reporters, like Peter Henley and Emily Hudson, I don't always agree with them, but I respect absolutely their integrity, and I respect absolutely that most of all they really care about the places that they represent, because they live there as well, and these places, the Isle of Wight, Hampshire, Dorset, it matters to them, and it matters to them what is going on in their communities. And actually that's one of the BBC's strong points, that it does still care, that you have people who serve these communities, who have a passion for what's happening, and actually a drive to report what they see as the truth about the workings of the council, about the workings of MPs, about the workings of the NHS, what's happening in dull planning committees, because they take the bread and butter of democracy really seriously. And long may they continue to do so, and we need to be investing much more in local BBC. It seems to be one of the purposes of actually paying the licence fee is not, bless him, to fund Gary Lineker's lifestyle, but actually to pay for a few more 30 grand or 40 grand journalists out of Southampton or out of the Isle of Wight to actually do a really good job in covering what happens in our area. So I've written to the BBC, along I know with other people. I thank my fellow other 7 Solent MPs, and I hope we get an answer from the bigwigs. I hope they actually look at this again. I hope the Minister can impress on Ofwat the need to actually to get a grip of this situation, because what's happening is wrong. Thank you.